I'm Mike Costello, and I'd like to talk to you in the next few minutes about transforming your life through the crises that we experience. Every one of us experiences difficult times in our lives, and sometimes the crises of life seem to bring us to a screeching halt. They seem to bring us to a point of hopelessness and fearfulness and fretfulness. But in reality, the crises of our lives can create opportunities for us to be transformed or changed from where we are. In all of the circumstances of life, we believe in new thought and in metaphysical philosophy, the reality that we live in our minds and not in the world. That means that what happens in your mind and in my mind, what takes place inside us, determines how we see and view and experience the world. And the vision that we have and the insight that we have within our minds creates the environment that we have. There's a story told of a caterpillar walking along a carpet. And of course, as a caterpillar's view of its world unfolds in its mind, it is considerably different than our view when we stand upright and move through life. But if you could imagine yourself as a caterpillar moving slowly across a carpet with a pattern and with texture, the caterpillar's range of vision and sight is such that that insect moves through the carpet looking down and looking at a very narrow view of where it's going. It may see the texture, it may see the carpet, it may see the color, but it sees only so much. And we all know that caterpillars transform or change in their life cycle into butterflies, and butterflies rise above the vision and the view that a caterpillar has. We're a lot like that in our own lives, but we have the wonderful and transforming ability that is even greater than that of the caterpillar and the butterfly, because by changing the way that we look at the circumstances and situations in life, we can change our view. Remember, that caterpillar is low to the ground, looking at the difficulties that he or she faces as they move across the carpet. Yet when that caterpillar is transformed into a butterfly, it is able to rise above the carpet, to fly over it, and to see a whole new view of the world that it saw as a caterpillar. When the caterpillar was moving, that view was limited to exactly what was in front of it and in its range of vision. But as soon as the caterpillar comes to the life cycle of transformation and becomes a butterfly, it rises above the carpet, it can see the total pattern, it can see where the caterpillar was going. It has a view that is higher and farther and brighter and more promising, certainly, than that of the caterpillar. We have the same challenge in dealing with life crises, and the challenge that we have is to have the vision of the caterpillar, the vision of the difficulties that we have in life and the challenges in life, but to transform our way of thinking in the midst of them so that we can view the situation from the dynamic of the butterfly, to see the whole and the larger picture. So often our view and vision is very limited. And in our limited view, when we experience the things that we experience in life that bring to us the situations that are crises for us, we have in our vision so tightly the circumstance or the situation. If the crisis is one that's brought on by finances, we see the fact that there isn't enough money in the checkbook, that there's limited resources. If it's a health crisis that comes, we get immersed in the illness or the condition that's brought us to this point of crisis. If it's an end to a relationship or a difficulty in a relationship, we see the people with such limited and finite vision. If it has to do with people who are moving out of our life, either by choice or by dispute or by the process that we call death, we find ourselves in crisis, and we again have a vision and a view that is much like that caterpillar. But in reality, every crisis that comes into our lives, into your life and into my life, create for us an opportunity for transformation. Because every time we're challenged, every time we're faced with something new and difficult, we have an opportunity to go through that experience, but in the process of going through it, we have the ability to grow through it as well. So often our thoughts are so complex, and we build thought upon thought until we have such confusion and such difficulty of thought process because our minds are so overweighted and overwhelmed by the crisis or the difficulty that we face. And if we go back to the reality and the simplicity of that caterpillar and that butterfly, and the difference of views between the two of them. And if we lay that overview of life and vision into and onto our own minds, we realize that in every complex situation, if we could get away from the complexity, if we could get out of the circumstance, if we could rise above it and see it more clearly, we would begin to view it in a different way, and we would open the door for transformation through the experience. It's very difficult when we're hurting. It's very difficult when we're in pain to understand and realize and grasp hold of the idea that in the midst of this crisis, in the midst of this difficult time, there can be some transformation or some positive experience. But that's exactly the kind of thinking that we need to have in the midst of our life crises. If we simplify our thinking and if we envision ourselves looking at the situation in a different way, we begin to clear our minds, we begin to change the process of mind and the process of thought, and we're able to be guided and directed. We believe that there is a universal intelligence, a divine intelligence and a divine mind that connects with our human mind. And we call that the mind of God connecting with our human dynamic and human mind. Others of different faith traditions, perhaps the one that you were raised in or have come to know, may have different words for it. It may be God, it may be the Holy Spirit, it may be something unnamed but infinite. But that connectiveness between the divine and the human brings into our lives the ability to view life and the challenges and the crises of life in a different way. And by connecting ourselves with divine mind and divine thought, we're able to proceed and move forward with the transformation of our lives through the crises that we have. You know, if a mathematician has a problem, someone who devotes his or her life to solving mathematical problems, as one problem comes to them, they work through it, they come up with a solution, and they solve the problem, and then they're immediately ready to solve another problem and a more difficult problem. And as the next problem comes to them, they work through the process and they solve that problem. And the next and the next. It is almost it is absolutely a positive experience as they deal with the solutions to the problems that are brought to them. If we had that same mentality, we would view our life experience and the crises and the difficulties and the pains in a much different way, because we would see each one as an opportunity for overcoming, an opportunity for transformation. We use affirmations and denials widely in New Thought and in metaphysical philosophy. Affirmations are statements of spiritual reality that affirm something that already is. Denials are statements that we use that deny the power of negative influences over us. It doesn't deny the reality of the circumstance or situation, but it denies the power that it has over us. So if we were facing a financial crisis and we don't have enough money to pay the bills that are coming due and that we need to pay in order to make our house payment, our rent payment, our car payment, we use affirmation and denial. You know, if we're faced with this reality of economic crises, if we have the view of the caterpillar, we can only see the problem and the circumstance. If we're able to transform our view to that of the butterfly, we see it in a much broader way. We see the problem much more different. And in order to do that, we use these techniques of affirmations and denials. An affirmation in the face of financial crisis may be, I see abundance everywhere. That is, we see the reality of abundance and the meeting of needs everywhere. And we deny the fact that this situation of limited resources has over us. And we open ourselves to be guided and directed in ways that will bring to us the abundance and prosperity that we need. So often we have discomfort with the difficulties of life. And in the midst of our discomfort, we want to deny that these situations are really here present with us. And a beginning process of transforming our view is to accept the things the way they are in life. If you are faced with a financial challenge, you are faced with a financial challenge. If you hurt, you hurt. If you are lonely, you are lonely. If you are ill, you are in the midst of that illness. But the power that these negative influences have over your life is limited to the way in which you think about them. Therefore, the power that crises have in your life to control you is directly in relationship to the dynamic of your mind and the reaction of your mind to the circumstances and situations of life. What we need in the midst of crisis, when you're faced with crisis and I'm faced with crisis, and every one of us in the human experience is going to be faced over and over again with crises, what we need to do is approach and view and experience every crisis with an open mind and to be watchful in the midst of that crisis situation for the reality that is going to open, guide, and direct us into the things that we should do, that we should think, and that can resolve the crisis. When we're in the midst of a crisis, we are there. And what we need to do in the midst of our crisis situations is clear our thinking, center ourselves in the presence and the power of God, and know that we will be guided and directed in ways that we could never have imagined before. And in order to do that, we have to have an open mind. We have to be open-minded, and we have to be watchful of the way that we think and the dynamic of our mind. If we become depressed, depression is often characterized and described by people as a downward feeling. And all of us who have dealt with depression in our own lives know that sinking feeling. And as we're able to change our mind, to change our view, the downward momentum of that experience slows and stops, and then we begin to rise up out of that hopelessness and helplessness as we open our minds to new ways of thinking. The word crisis itself comes from a Greek word that has to do with the meaning and the description of choosing to decide, making a decision. And in every crisis, we have to decide. You have to and I have to in the midst of our crises of life. We have to decide whether or not we're going to be ruled and controlled by the crisis, or whether we're going to view the crisis as an opportunity to transform us and change us in some way. Whatever crisis comes, whether it's financial or relationship, jobs, illness, all of the crises that come into our lives will come into our lives, and they will be dealt with. They'll be dealt with either by our acceptance of where we are and allowing ourselves to stay or go down in the experience, or to raise our vision and to change the way we view the circumstance and situation. Wherever you are in life, wherever I am in life, at any given time, is exactly where we need to be. That may be a difficult concept for you to understand and comprehend, but we believe that from a spiritual standpoint, from the standpoint of our understanding of the universe and the divine plan of life for ourselves, all of us on planet Earth and this entire planet, that each of us is at the point where we need to be, and each of us experience the very things that we need to experience for our soul and spiritual growth. And so when you're faced with a crisis, when any of us are faced with a crisis, it is an opportunity for us to change our way of thinking and to be transformed by the experience, because crisis in and of itself brings to us and brings us to a point of absolute decision. And the decision is always ours, and the decision always rests in our mind and the way we think. And so as we change the way we think, we can change the quality of our lives. As we deal with crises, we can see them as negative experiences that continue to freeze us in the experience that we have. Or we can see a crisis as the ability to change our vision, to change our view and our sight, and to rise as the butterfly transforms from the caterpillar into a new view and a new vision of what the experience means for us. We believe in prayer as a centering force, and we'd like to invite you at this point in the program to pause with us for just a moment of prayer and reflection. Eternal and loving God, we gather our hearts and minds together in your divine and loving presence. We know that each of life's crises come to strengthen us as your whole and perfect children, and each experience of life that does bring us what appears to be crisis, we center ourselves in a new and clearer vision of your light and life in our existence and in our being. And we do these things in the name of faith, in the name of hope, in the name of love. Amen.
Those were wonderful pointers that you gave regarding crisis. And usually we don't think we can be transformed by crisis. We think we can be beaten down by it. But if we can remember there's always the good and praise it, then we gain.
Absolutely. And that's why when we talk about crisis, I like to talk about that analogy of the caterpillar and the butterfly.
Yes.
We think so often of a caterpillar as an ugly little thing, and yet it transforms and changes in its life cycle to something beautiful. And in Christianity, we see the butterfly so often as symbolic of spirit and the liberation of spirit and in the presence of God, and even synonymous with the Holy Spirit sometimes. But that transformation is very important, and certainly when we're in a crisis, we feel like a hairy little worm.
Yes. And then, but we can rise above it all through faith, and it's easier said than done. We can sit here and say, if we have enough faith, we can surmount it. But we know people as ministers, we've ministered to people who have surmounted insurmountable obstacles, and they come out so victorious if they just keep their eye on their faith.
Mm-hmm. And key to that is conditioning ourselves to change our way of thinking. And I think, if there's nothing else that is key to what I said during this talk, it is that in the midst of crisis, which is inevitable, it doesn't matter how good we are, it doesn't matter what church we go to, it doesn't matter what our political or religious affiliation, everyone's going to have crises in their lives. But as we change the way that we think about crises, then life changes for us. Our vision and our view changes. And I think that's what the crises of life, I know that's what the crises of life come for. They come to empower us and strengthen us and invite us and call to us to change our way of thinking.
Yes, it's exactly an overall plan. It's part of their plan of life, and that's why we're here, to grow spiritually. And if we didn't have a crisis in our life, we would never grow.
Mm-hmm. And so often in religion, different religions, and in spirituality, we try to interpret crises. You've seen it in your work as a minister, and so have I. So many people who try to interpret why somebody has an illness or why something has happened. And certainly there are causes for a lot of things in life. Some things are beyond our understanding of the cause. And what we need to do, I think, is step back from trying to analyze or seek an understanding of the cause and simply get in the midst of, this is what has happened, now what do we do?
Yes, just see the problem and then look for the solution. And if we see the problem clearly, we can see the solution clearly. And sometimes it just means we need time. Mm-hmm. We need time to adjust and to go on. But to keep on keeping on is the secret, and we can't give up. And we've seen people whose lives have been transformed just by going out and doing something for others when they think they can't go one more step.
Mm-hmm. That's key. I think when we're in the midst of a crisis, we need to get out of the crisis by getting our thought process and our action, the dynamic of our life, out of that problem.
Yes.
I think if someone is faced with a horrible problem, the worst thing that we can do, or that anyone can do, is sit in the midst of it and wring our hands.
Yes. And we've seen that happen. I think I mentioned once before that at a severe crisis in my own life, the death of someone I loved very much, I got bursitis in my shoulder and pleurisy, and I realized I had to get off that sofa and go do something, and I did. I went to the phone and called a lady who wanted me to work for her, and told her that I would, and it disappeared, and it never came back, and that was 40 years ago. But and I know I've seen it happen in other people's lives.
Yeah, and a major part of this process is what we believe in terms of the fact that God is in the midst of every circumstance and situation with us.
Yes.
And if we will just open our perception to the reality of God in us, then no matter what's happened to us, we'll be guided and directed.
Yes, as you said, the key is in knowing that we are going to each face crises in our lives, more than one, surely, and some major ones. But if we know that we're going to, when they come, then we can surmount them more easily and not feel as defeated, because we don't think, well, we've been singled out with this terrible tragedy, but we just know it's a part of the ongoing. And of course, we believe in karma, in reincarnation, and there are karmic causes, but we can't always just say, well, that's karma. We have to just keep going and know that there was a cause for that, and the effect, we felt the effect, and now we have to go on creating.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and we have an obligation to cooperate with the universe in this unfolding.
Yes.
And as we've talked before, there is a collective consciousness on this planet, and that collective consciousness is the collective consciousness of all of those with whom we come in contact and others with whom we may never come in contact, yet the interlocking reality of consciousness causes certain things to happen in the world and in our lives,
Right.
and we don't understand them.
Yeah.
And some of them have to do, and obviously when we get into karmic issues, so many people are intrigued by that, so they want to interpret it one way or another. But I think an important thing to understand and remember about karmic law is that some of it has to do with occurrences that are taking place even out of our realm.
Yeah.
They're taking place in the spirit realm, they're taking place in the physical realm, and this interconnectiveness of consciousness creates a karmic domino effect, if you will, and it simply has to be met,
Yeah.
and it has to be dealt with. And so it isn't explaining it away, and it isn't even important to understand it. More importantly is to deal with that which comes.
Yes, and if we can bear in mind what you just said as being truth, then we can look to the universe for help. And we know that we're undergirded by not only the angelic kingdom, but by many others with whom we have soul contact.
Mhm.
And of course with God the whole. And there's always that contact, and it's always there. We just fail sometimes to see it or find it and know it for real.
And that connectiveness that we have with the divine realm, with those in spirit, and with the presence and power of God is such a tremendous source of faith, and should be such a tremendous source of strength in the midst of our life crises.
Yes, but when we're going through a crisis, we become so self-centered. And if we can just get out of ourself and realize that the universality of problems and of the ongoingness of life, then we don't feel as selfish and self-centered.
Mm-hmm. And of course, we always believe that our crisis is the worst, and again, that comes back to a self-centered
Yes.
aspect of life. And often I've heard the story told that if we took all of the problems of everyone in a room and exchanged them, they wouldn't be problems at all,
Yes.
because we personalize the problems. And of
Yes.
course, so many times the crises, and and a crisis, of course, is a major life event, but if it's a death or the end of a relationship or a financial crisis, then there is a real challenge.
Yes, but we have to know that everything happens for a reason, and we have to look for that reason and then keep going. And the main thing is just to keep going, but the reason will become obvious to us.
Mm-hmm.
And we have and just to remember that we have so much help. There is so much help from the inner realms of being that if we can always remember that, then we can bear any crisis more fully.
And that's a tremendous truth that we need to just drive home to everyone around us, that this help is always there.
Yes.
This support is always there. The
Yes.
presence of God and all of the helpers that we have from the other side and angelic beings are constantly providing us guidance and are surrounding us in the midst of even the most painful losses.
Yes, and we can realize too that our grief is very selfish. We're just thinking of what we would like to have done for that one, and anyone who believes in a hereafter at all must also believe that the hereafter is far more glorious and wonderful than anything that can be here on earth. So if so, why do we want to keep those we love chained, in a sense, to the earth realm when it's so much more wonderful on the inner planes?
Mhm. Yeah, I think death is a great example of our faith being tested.
Yes.
And the testing of faith strengthens us and empowers us. And we know that as people leave us in the experience that we call death, that they don't leave us at all. They change, and that we are going to be changed.
Yes.
So.
There's so many examples I could give in my own life and also of lives of people that I know. But the bottom line is always, if we have faith, just as the cliche is a grain of mustard seed, if we have faith, then we can bear anything, anytime. And then in retrospect, we'll be able to see more clearly why that crisis happened in our lives and what we were supposed to have done about it. And usually what we do is what we were supposed to have done if we don't just sit down and give up.
Mm-hmm. And then as we go through each life crisis, the real empowerment comes on the other side,
Yes.
when we've overcome the circumstance and situation and we can see it clearly.
Yes, and a crisis is always something that we don't want to have to face, but when we face it squarely, it's not a crisis anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It's the fear. It's the fear that the crisis has created that gives us the problem. So if we face it head on, then we lose that fear, and then we keep going.
Mm-hmm. And that fear paralyzes us and keeps us from being guided and directed and doing the things that we need to do.
Yes, every time. Fear is the worst and is our worst enemy. Some people say death is the enemy. Well, death is a friend, but fear is the enemy. And we fear so many things that are so senseless. And we all do. We can't just sit here and say others do. We all do that. But we know from our own experience that which we feared, as Job, you use the story of Job very often in your talks or occasionally, and that is a good one, because Job, that which I feared has come upon me. And so if he hadn't feared it, he implied it probably wouldn't have been there.
And the creative power of that thought process,
Yes.
that thoughts draw things to us and thoughts create.
Yes.
And so we need to be very cautious what we're creating.
Exactly, because we are co-creators with God the whole. And if we can remember that we're co-creators and we create that which we wish to, then we consciously wish to create good, then that's what we will create. And every thought we think, every act we do creates a thought form. And it's like set in stone, as it were. It's very important, the thought forms we create. So if we're always positive, then we're always creating positive thought forms.
And as we create those thoughts, we have to deal with what they create and what they bring into our lives.
Yes. And the transformation is so glorious, and we can see it in the lives of people we know, men and women whose mates have gone and they're left alone, and temporarily they're like paralyzed by fear and grief, and then they go on to wonderful, wonderful work. And it's the service that is the important aspect there.
Absolutely. And the service that we have is what we gain from the crises of our life experiences. And Reverend Freelander and I have been sharing with you some ideas in dealing with life crises. We hope that you found them to be helpful and useful, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Giving the Spirit fullest control. Confident living rights every wrong. Dynamic power helps me be strong. Confident living comforts my heart. From such a blessing I can't depart. Confident living helps me expand visions of value, the kingdom at hand. Confident living, talent to win, gift of the Spirit moves from within.